Shalom everyone, and welcome to ReBoot the Root. In this series of teachings, we're going to be looking at the story of Hanukkah. In fact, we're going to be rebooting the story of Hanukkah, giving us an educated understanding of what Hanukkah is through the book of 1st Maccabees. So join me, if you will, as we reboot the root and reboot the story of Hanukkah. Shalom. Shalom everyone, and welcome to this episode of Reboot the Root. Thank you for joining me as we continue our journey back to truth. This is episode 1 of an exciting new series that we are going to dive into that may or may not be familiar to you, but it's a very interesting subject to understand what is Hanukkah. So maybe some of you out there have kept Hanukkah in the past, and many of you out there probably don't know that much about Hanukkah. But it's going to be a very interesting journey here to study what is Hanukkah. And so, as usual, we are going to reboot our root, and we're going to challenge our belief system, and we're going to open up our curiosity banks, to open our eyes and our hearts and our ears to find out what do we understand about Hanukkah. And so Hanukkah is one of those subjects that you really don't know much about unless you actually celebrate it or participate in it. So this series is going to be very different in the fact that we're going to go into a lot of history, and that's something we haven't really done on this series before, or these series of teachings on Reboot the Root. We haven't really done a lot of history, but we're going to get into some world history, and we're going to get into some Jewish history, some Hebraic history, as we learn about what is Hanukkah. And so we're going to find out what is Hanukkah about, and what's the interesting about it. As we get towards the end of this teaching series, we're going to connect Hanukkah to the Messiah. And we are going to show how Hanukkah actually fits in with the birth of Messiah. And so join me, if you will, as we learn about rebooting Hanukkah. So first of all, we have to understand that Hanukkah is not a required or biblically mandated feast. It is what is called as a minor feast, meaning that it is a feast that was originated by man. But understanding about Hanukkah will actually help us to understand about our personal connection to Israel, our personal connection to the Messiah, and Hanukkah will actually point us to the birth of Messiah. And so if you've seen my other teaching about finding out when Jesus was really born, we make the connection about the conception of Jesus during Hanukkah. And so Hanukkah, as we begin to study it, we're going to study the first book of Maccabees, and we're going to go through the first 3 chapters to learn about the story of Hanukkah, and we're going to understand what relevance and importance it has for us. So Hanukkah is correctly understood also as the festival of lights and also the festival of dedication. So we go to an outside source to kind of give us a little bit of more insight about what Hanukkah is. So Yeshua.org says, this holiday is a man-made holiday. It is not a feast day ordained by God, so it is not mentioned in the Jewish Bible, the Torah, the HaTorah, or the Tanakh, but it is celebrated by Jews around the world. And Hanukkah is a sequence of 8 days set aside to praise and thank God for his faithfulness and miraculous power. And I might add to this that Hanukkah is not only enjoyed by Jews, but also Messianics and Hebrew roots and other Bible believers out there, that when they really understand what Hanukkah is about, they're more than glad to celebrate it, because those who don't want to celebrate Hanukkah often don't want to exchange one man-made holiday for another, meaning that those of us who've decided not to keep Christmas don't want to get into another religious group and celebrate Hanukkah, afraid that we don't know what we're celebrating. So that's the point of this teaching, is to educate you about what Hanukkah is. So while it is not a biblically man-made holiday, it is a holiday that really gives us a history lesson, where we've come from, and to learn lessons from, and to make a spiritual connection of understanding of what was accomplished at Hanukkah and what Hanukkah means. Hanukkah is, like I said, is not one of the commanded biblical feasts. It is one of the two minor feasts that are celebrated as an uncommanded feast. So Hanukkah is one of two of the minor feasts. The other minor feast would be Purim. And so possibly in the future I might do a teaching about what Purim is as well. So we have to understand that while Hanukkah is not in a canonized book of the Bible, it's not one of the 66 books of the Bible, it is a apocryphal book. So apocryphal is basically, in its barest form of meaning, is an extra non-canonical biblical book, meaning that it's not going to be in your mainstream collection of Bible books. It is an extra book. And so we are going to see that the Hanukkah story is contained in the first book of Maccabees. So there's actually two books of Maccabees. We're only going to be concerned with Maccabees 1, chapters 1 through 3. And the interesting thing is that Maccabees is considered a historical book. Now, there are extra books out there. There's lots of extra books out there that are also considered apocryphal books. And I wouldn't consider them theological books, and neither would I consider Maccabees a theological book. Meaning, what I mean by that is I wouldn't study it to base your theology on. So there's other extra canonical books out there that are good for studying culture, studying history, but I definitely would not consider them as part of your theology. And so they're not really theological books, but they're books that give us an extra insight into the Hebraic culture. So also understanding that when Hanukkah is kept, we understand that Hanukkah is usually kept in December, but I have seen it celebrated at the end of November as well. So with that being said, it is a winter feast. And it's actually, for me, Hanukkah's actually been a blessing, because Hanukkah and Purim have those attributes to it that give us an extra time of getting together with others to celebrate our our Hebraic culture, our Hebraic identity, our Hebraic history between the times of Sukkot and Passover. So we kind of have some extra times to kind of reflect upon our culture and identity with other believers during the dark months of the winter. So you've heard me talk about the Apocrypha, and so we probably should talk about what is the Apocrypha. So let's turn to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which is a good definition of what the Apocrypha is. And I'm quoting from them. In Bible study, the term Apocrypha refers to sections of the Bible that are not sanctioned as belonging to certain official canons. In some Protestant versions, these sections appear between the Old and New Testaments. More generally, the word refers to writings or statements whose purported origin is in doubt. Consequently, the adjective apocryphal describes things like legends and anecdotes that are purported to be true by way of repeated tellings, but that have not been proven or verified, and therefore most likely are not factual. Both Apocrypha and apocryphal derive via Latin from the Greek verb apocryptine, meaning to hide away, from cryptine, meaning to hide. So this is the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary of definition of Apocrypha. And so, like I said, apocryphal books should never be taken as theological books like the other 66 books of the canonized Bible, but they can lend some understanding to Hebraic culture and thinking. Continuing on with Merriam-Webster Dictionary's definition of Apocrypha, they lend this idea. Apocrypha is fictitious, fabulous, legendary, mythical. Apocryphal meaning lends itself to having the nature as having something imagined or invented. So this is the idea of the apocryphal books. And this is according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Dictionary.com defines apocryphal as having a doubtful authorship or authenticity rather. So when we look at apocryphal books, we cannot really assume that the names of these books actually were written by the name on there. Like the book of Enoch, I don't believe was actually written by Enoch. It just bears his name. And the book of Enoch is a good example to attribute the definition of fictitious or mythical and understanding what the Apocrypha is. Unfortunately, a lot of apocryphal books appeal to people's sense of wonder. They're what you call as supplying substance to itching ears. People who have a desire for knowledge will end up wanting to read these apocryphal books. And so my experience with apocryphal books is that a lot of people get off on a tangent, they get off on the wrong track, and they start leaving the canonized scriptures and going to these extra books, or they start giving the same weight to the apocryphal books as they do the canonized scriptures, which we cannot do because you'll find they start contradicting the canonized scriptures. Wikipedia, in its article on Apocrypha, talks about that Apocrypha is a plural word, meaning the singular form of Apocrypha is apocryphone, okay? And that is originally denotes a hidden or secret writings. So these apocryphal writings, they were written to, unveil rather, the things that we didn't understand in some of the other books of the Bible. So apocryphal books was, I believe, was man's attempt to fill in the blanks of things that weren't fully written about. So these apocryphal books can be very detrimental and very destructive to one's theological journey. And so we cannot, we can read the books for interesting, to say, hey, that was interesting, to understand what people were writing during that time. So it's really just a piece of literature and definitely not a source of theology. So the basis for Hanukkah is going to be found in 2nd Maccabees, and we're going to go to chapter 10, verses 5 through 8. Now upon the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very day it was cleansed again, even the 25th day of the same month, which is Kislev. And they kept 8 days with gladness, as in the Feast of the Tabernacles, remembering that not long afore, they had held the Feast of the Tabernacles, when as they wandered in the mountains and dens like beasts. Therefore they bare branches and fair boughs and palms also, and sang songs unto him that had given them good success in cleansing his place. They ordained also by a common statute and decree that every year those days should be kept of the whole nation of the Jews. So what we're talking about with Hanukkah is that we're celebrating that our people, our Hebrew brothers and sisters, they took back the profane temple and they cleansed it. So Hanukkah is about rededicating, re-cleansing the temple, and this happened on the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, and they kept this for 8 days. And so part of the cleansing the temple was to light the menorah in the temple at Jerusalem for 8 days. And so this is why we do Hanukkah on the 25th. It starts on the 25th day of Kislev and goes for 8 days. So it's going to go into the next month, the next Hebrew month. And so we've been keeping Hanukkah since that time. And so we have this literary reasoning for why we keep Hanukkah and when we keep Hanukkah. So you may be asking yourself, what does Hanukkah mean? First of all, you've probably seen Hanukkah spelled 2 different ways, one with an H and one with a CH. So the CH is the more Hebraic way. The one with an H is probably to accommodate English-speaking people. So the Hanukkah sound is the actual Hebrew, the correct Hebrew pronunciation, where Hanukkah is more of an English, easy for English-speaking people to pronounce. So you've probably seen it both ways, one with the H and one with the CH. So what does the word Hanukkah mean? Hanukkah means dedication. So as I was just explaining to you, that we're rededicating the temple because it was profaned. And we'll talk a little bit later about how it was profaned. But they cleansed the temple by lighting the menorah for 8 days. And so the temple is being rededicated. So Hanukkah is all about the Feast of Dedication. Following their victory over the Greeks, the Maccabees rededicated the Holy Temple and its altar, which had been desecrated and defiled by the pagan invaders. So we're going to find out that 2 things happened at Hanukkah. Is that the Maccabees were the name that was attributed to the group of rebels who revolted against the Greek occupation and the defilement of the temple at Jerusalem. So Hanukkah is all about remembering the rebellion of the Israelites against the Greeks. Continuing on about what does Hanukkah mean, the word Hanukkah mean, rather, the word Hanukkah can be divided into 2 words. Hanu means they rested, and Ha has a numerical value of 25. On the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, the Maccabees rested from their battle against the Greeks. So this is what Hanukkah means. Is it also actually has two ideas of reasoning of what Hanukkah means. One meaning it is the feast of dedication, but it also means that they rested on the 25th day of Kislev, and Kislev is the 9th month on the Hebrew calendar. As I said before, Hanukkah can be spelled with an H as well as the CH. The Feast of Dedication celebrates the cleansing and rededication of the temple during the period of the Maccabees. This family of the Hasmonean dynasty, and the Hasmonean dynasty was a time of Hebraic rulers or authority in the land of Israel during the time of the Maccabean revolt. So the Maccabees is the term attributed to the group of resistance fighters, if you will, of the rebels that revolted against the Greeks. So these are the Maccabees. This is what they're officially called. Also, when we look at Hanukkah, we see that is also the Festival of Light. So turning to another source of information from raptureready.com, we see that they talk about that the Festival of Light celebrates the miracle of the burning of the menorah for 8 days, despite having only 1 day's supply of oil. So this is typically called the miracle of the oil. So we have to understand that there's a lot of mysticism that goes into Hanukkah, where they think that some kind of magic or great miracle happened to make the oil last for 8 days when they only had enough for 1. Well, that is true, it did happen, but what also happened is God came and he supplied enough oil for them to have a day. It wasn't, I mean, there's the idea that people may believe that the oil mysteriously just lasted for 8 days when there's only 1, but there's also the idea that God also supplied the oil. So we have to give credit where credit is due. God just made the oil, made enough oil for them to have to be able to make the menorah last. So Rapture Ready gives us this information about the Feast of Dedication is about celebrating the cleansing and rededication of the temple during the period of the Maccabees. They give us the information about the Festival of Light, celebrating the miracle of the burning of the menorah for 8 days, despite having only 1 day's supply of oil. And they also reaffirm the idea I was telling you about, is that Hanukkah can be spelled with an H as well as a CH. Both are correctly accepted. So in Hanukkah, we have a thing that we use that is the center piece of Hanukkah. In other words, it is something that we visually see as a representation of Hanukkah. So I was telling you about that Hanukkah remembers the dedication of the temple that was cleansed, the temple was cleansed by the menorah burning for 8 days. So we use a thing that is like a menorah, but it has its own little name and its own little design. It's called a Hanukkah. And so a Hanukkah is like a menorah, but it has 9 candles instead of 7. So a Hanukkah is a lamp holder that has 9 candles, in contrast to menorah that has 7. So that is called a Hanukkah. The center candle of the Hanukkah is called the shamash, or the servant candle. And this Hanukkah is burned in our homes to represent that the menorah burned for 8 days. Okay? And in lighting a Hanukkah, we just don't light it any old way. Tradition teaches us is that we light the candles from right to left, just as Hebrew is read right to left. So what we'll do is on the first day of Hanukkah, we'll light the shamash candle, which is the servant candle. We'll use that to light the first candle, which represents the first night of Hanukkah. And then day 2, we'll light the first candle and the second candle, and so on through the 8th day. So by the 8th day of Hanukkah, we have all the candles lit. So you're going to have a lot of candles that you need on hand to be able to light the Hanukkah rather, for all 8 days. We're going to go over the basics of lighting your Hanukkah at Hanukkah. So obviously we're going to start with the first day of Hanukkah. So first you have to identify what that day is. So we start by getting your Hanukkah out, and we set up all the candles. We count from right to left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so this 9th one is called the Shamash candle. It's also known as the servant candle, which lights the other candles. So we have to start by lighting that one first. So we light the Shamash candle like so. And then, because it's the first time of doing something like this for the year, we say the Shekiano. The Shekiano is used for anything that is done for the very time of the year. So since this is the first night of Hanukkah, we take the Chumash and we say the Shekianu. And so we say Baruch Atah, and we say the Shekianu while we're lighting the first candle, the first night of Hanukkah, which is the right. Just like when you read Hebrew, it's from right to left. So we take the Chumash candle and we light the first candle, and we say Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shekianu Vikimianu Vihikiyanu Leazamam Ha-Zeh. And in English we say, Blessed are you, Lord our Yah, ruler of the universe, who has given us life, sustained us, and allowed us to reach this day. And so now we place the Chumash candle back in its place, and then we have our other blessing that we say along with it. And this one is called the Hanukkah Blessing. So we take, as we light each candle of the evening, we are going to say this blessing as well. So this is the one we would say every night of the evening, except for the first night we say the Shekiano. So we're going to say the Shekiano plus this one, but the nights 2 through 8, we're only going to say the Hanukkah blessing minus the Shekiano, because it's not the first time anymore. So in addition to lighting the first candle, we're going to light the second through the 8th candle as well by saying the Hanukkah blessing. We say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu chachim chokot umadim lesimcha lekvod Yeshua HaMashiach Adoneu or Ha'alam. And in English, we say, Blessed are you, Lord, King of the universe, who has given us holidays, customs, and seasons of happiness. Sorry about that. For the glory of our Yah, Yeshua the Messiah, the light of the world. So I already shared with you before that the difference between a Hanukkah menorah and a regular menorah is that a regular menorah that's used in the temple, and sometimes a menorah is also used in our homes. But a menorah has 7 candles, where a Hanukkah has 9 candles. And if we understand the simplistic understanding of what a menorah is, or a Hanukkah, it is merely a lampstand. So the menorah was used in the temple or the tabernacle to provide light. So the whole idea of that the menorah and the Hanukkah represent light is at the heart of what Hanukkah is about. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to stop right here at this episode 1, and we're going to continue in the next episode, episode 2, we're going to continue to talk about the Hanukkah, and we're going to continue to talk about what Hanukkah is in its basic form and how we keep the Feast of Hanukkah in our homes. But for now, I want to thank you for joining me for this first episode of Reboot the Root, and invite you to come back when we'll continue to study the root of Hanukkah. Shalom.